So now we're going to be covering Kingdom Animalia, and this section is just going to be on invertebrates. There's going to be some general animal characteristics that we're going to go over, but then we're going to go exclusively over invertebrates, which are animals that don't have backbones, and then the next video is going to include vertebrates and chordates. So characteristics of animals are shown there. You should already know those. Body arrangements. So the one on the left shows animals that are radially symmetrical. Animals that are radially symmetrical, it means that they have a central point and then they have parts that are organized in a concentric pattern. So if you were to look down at this hydra from the top, you would see it would look all the same in a circular type of pattern. Starfish also have a circular body arrangement. So do sea anemones, sea urchins, and various other animals. Any animal that can be folded in two, basically, is considered to be bilaterally symmetrical. So here you can see that this crayfish or this lobster, it can be split so that it's equally divided into a left and a right portion. So if the animal can be split in two to be equal parts, then it's bilaterally symmetrical. And if there's many ways that you can split it in two so that they're equal halves, then it's radially symmetrical. This slide is showing you that there's three types of sections. So sections are just ways that you can cut a specimen. So the first one is called a transverse. And transverse is when you make an incision or a section that separates the cranial, which is the head, from the posterior, which is the tail end. A frontal section is one that divides the ventral, which is the belly, from the back, which is the dorsal surface. And a sagittal section is when you cut down the middle, splitting their left and right halves. They don't need to be exactly down the middle. They just got to separate one side from the other. So this section could be made further up here, but it's still separating the head from the tail. And this section could be further forward, it's still separating the belly from the back. And this section here is separating the left from the right half, but you could do it more over on the right if you wanted to. Okay, this is just showing you that this is a sea star in its larval stage. So this is an early stage of what a sea star would look like. So as an animal gets older, it may change the type of symmetry that it has. So the larvae has a bilateral symmetry, and the starfish has a pentamerous or radial symmetry. So this cladogram is just basically a diagram that shows relationships among living things based on their evolutionary developments. So something like a sea sponge, which is considered to be an animal, it has asymmetrical symmetry because there's no way that you can equally divide it into halves. Here's a sea anemone. Like I said, it's radially symmetrical, and here's a human who's bilaterally symmetrical. So what seems to have happened is that we have this early animal ancestor, and the first type of animals to evolve or branch out from our ancestor were the sponges, and they were asymmetrical. Then secondly, we had the radially symmetrical animals, and then we have the bilateral animals. So the oldest ones are the asymmetrical ones. The radial ones were next through evolution, and then the bilateral animals are more recent. So this is just another cladogram that shows certain traits being developed over time. So basically, you had sharks, which are made of a cartilaginous skeleton. Eventually, bony skeletons evolved, and then we had different types of bony fish. Then they developed four limbs, and then you got amphibians. And then they developed amniotic eggs, and you got different branches of like primates, rodents, crocodiles, and birds. So sometimes what happens is there's some kind of evolutionary occurrence which causes animals to develop certain types of adaptations. All right, so these are the various phyla that you're going to be going over when we're discussing the invertebrates. So just to quickly give you an idea of what their names sound like, these are all going to be animals that have no backbone. And when you do your dissection of your worm, it's not going to have a backbone. So these are animals without vertebral columns. Phylum Porifera, which are the sponges. Phylum Cnidaria, which are the jellyfish. Phylum Echinodermata, which are the sea stars. Phylum Mollusca, which are any type of shellfish. Phylum Arthropoda, which are the jointed appendaged animals. Phylum Annelida, which are the worms that have segments. Phylum Nematoda, which are the parasitic worms. And Phylum Platyhelminthes, which are the flatworms. All right, and then we're going to go over vertebrates later. So we're talking about phylum Porifera here. These are the sea sponges. So sponges show an asymmetry. They don't have symmetry at all. And if you were to look inside of one of these little channels, what you'd see is that they were empty on the middle. This is called the atrium. Then the top hole right here is the osculum. So what actually happens is water comes in through the pore, which are these little dots, in current water, and excurrent osculum. So water comes in the pore and leaves the osculum. We say in current pore, excurrent osculum. All right, so now we've moved on to jellyfish, the cnidarians. So the C is silent. The cnidarians actually have a funny life cycle. They have an asexual part of their life cycle and they have a sexual part of their life cycle. So this is a box jellyfish. It's considered one of the most deadliest animals in the world. It's very, very tiny. We'll show you a video in class. This is the life cycle of a jellyfish. So it goes between the medusa stage, which is the one that you're used to seeing, and also the polyp stage, which is where it reproduces asexually, which is interesting. This is a picture of the stingrays that cnidarians have. So the cnidocytes are the cells that have this. So here's a cell, here's a cnidocyte with cnidocysts. So the cell is a cnidocyte, and the coiled up stingray is the cnidocyst. So jellyfish exhibit radial symmetry and they undergo sexual and asexual reproduction. So when you actually get stung by a jellyfish, what happens is the coiled up cnidocyst is expelled and basically shoots out, and a little tiny, it's almost like a needle pinches your skin, and that's the sting that you feel. So this is phylum Mollusca, so we're just jumping down. Phylum Mollusca, these are all the shellfish. This is their common name. So they include, there's 3 different types of shellfish. There's the bivalves, which are the animals that have 2 valves, like a clam. Also scallops are part of that group as well. Then there's the univalves or gastropods. So you can call it either a univalve or a gastropod. They have 1 shell. And then there's the cephalopods. Cephala means head and pod means foot, so these are the head-footed animals like the squid and the octopus. So they tend to be slow on land but very quick in the water. They have soft bodies, so while they may have a shell portion to them, their bodies are actually very soft. They have a head, foot, and visceral mass, so they have 3 parts to their bodies: the head, the foot, and the visceral mass. So in this animal here, the foot is like what it slides on. So just know that they're soft and that they can either have 2 shells, 1 shell, or they're head-footed. The arthropods, are any animal that has a jointed appendage. So they're put into 4 groups basically. So this is both the biggest and smallest phyla of animals. So of all these phyla that are here, this phyla has the most in number, but it's the smallest in that it's like the smallest in size. So like insects are small, so it has small creatures that are in it, but is the biggest in number. They have something called an exoskeleton, which you're going to notice about your grasshopper when you do that dissection. The exoskeleton is just like they put their skeleton on the outside of their bodies instead of internalizing it like us. We have endoskeletons, they're on the inside of our body. They don't have bones, but they have like protection on the outside of their body, so they tend to be crunchy. They have 3 sections to their bodies: the head, thorax, and the abdomen. So the 4 groups of arthropods. Number 1 is the myriapods, and these are the millipedes and centipedes. Okay, myriapods. The second group are the insects. Okay, so here's insects. Insects have wings and they have 6 legs. Then there's the crustaceans, which are the animals that we see in the seawater. So this is a horseshoe crab, but it would also include lobster and other crabs. And then you have arachnids, which would be like scorpions. Okay, so 4 groups of arthropods. Notice that all of these animals have jointed appendages. This guy you can't see, but he has crab-like legs that are underneath. So they have jointed appendages, joint, just like you and I have joints. Insects, they have jointed legs, they bend, and their legs are also bendy as well. Okay, so arthropods, joint-footed, that's what arthropoda means, and so they have jointed appendages. So with a closer look of arthropods, you see here that like a spider has jointed appendages. Ecdysis is another name for molting. It's when an animal sheds its shell. So these animals, they may look like they're immune to any type of attack because they have a shell, but actually they do need to molt because as they grow, their shell gets too small for them, and they'll actually crack down their back and they'll wiggle out. So this is a lobster shell that has been vacated. So the lobster is actually wiggled out. I'll show you a video of it on YouTube later. So this shell will just be left behind and it'll fall apart and break down in the sea and act as sediment on the bottom of the ocean. And then what's going to happen is the lobster, he's soft for a while, but then his soft skin hardens into another shell. So the arachnids here, basically, all you need to worry about is that they have the jointed appendages, and they usually have a stinger as well. There's a crustacean, so it's a crab. He's a crustacean. He lives in the water. He's a jointed appendages. The myriapods, they have jointed appendages too, so they can either be centipedes or millipedes. So this guy here looks like he's a millipede, and this guy here looks like he's a centipede. So centipedes have fewer legs than the millipedes. You don't need to copy down. You don't need to copy down this. You don't need to copy down that. You don't need to copy down that. But I do want you to copy down this because we're doing grasshoppers. So insects, okay, taking a closer look at insects. Insects are different from arachnids. Okay, insects have 6 legs and they have wings. Arachnids have no wings and they have 8 legs, like spiders. Okay, so 3 pairs of legs, 6, 3 on each side. They have their bodies split up into a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. So head. Thorax is where the wings are attached to, and then the abdomen is usually where the legs are attached to. Here's the abdomen. They usually have 2 antennae, and they could have 1 or 2 pairs of wings. Okay, looking at their mouth parts, they have adapted mouth parts for various functions. So they could have a piercing, sucking mouth part, a chewing, biting mouth part. So this is like our grasshopper. He chews grass, and this piercing, sucking mouth part is kind of like what a mosquito looks like. Okay, so here's a chewer. This is your grasshopper. He has very strong mandibles for chewing. His mouth kind of opens from side to side instead of top down, like ours. And this would be like a mosquito or a butterfly when they have to get nectar. They have a long proboscis here, and this allows them to suck. So insects have compound eyes, which means that if you look really closely at their eye, they have a whole bunch of lenses as opposed to one lens like us. So this allows them to see hundreds of copies of the same thing, and it makes them very good at detecting motion because of this. It looks kind of confusing. I'll let you guys see what an insect sees from their perspective using these special goggles, but at least they can detect motion very easily, which is important for them because they're so small that they can get killed easily. So the insects also have specialized legs. So if you're running like a cockroach, you have a very fine tip at the end of your leg. If you're jumping, you obviously have to have elasticy parts in your joints to allow you to jump like a grasshopper. If you're a pollinating bug, you tend to have lots of hairs so that you can pick up pollen. And if you're a digging bug, you obviously have to have very strong arms and legs for digging. Insects, like all invertebrates, do not have lungs. So you're going to notice with your grasshopper, they have these little dots on their abdomen, and that's like little tubes where oxygen is exchanged. So oxygen comes in those little pores, goes throughout their body through something called tracheal tubes, and then it expels the CO2. They don't have lungs. They don't have a whole organ that's dedicated to it. Insects, they can undergo incomplete or complete metamorphosis. So complete metamorphosis means that they look completely different. So here's a grub here. We call them caterpillars. Caterpillars will develop into a cocoon and then they'll become a butterfly. This is complete metamorphosis because they go from egg to adult. They look completely different. Whereas an incomplete metamorphosis, the youth version and the adult version look basically the same. The only difference is that they grow wings. So incomplete is very slight changes in appearance, and complete means that they look very different.